Hey guys! Tonight, we follow the muddy hoofprints of divine irritation, celestial togas, and one surprisingly well-mannered goat. You're high on Olympus, literally and mythologically standing at the edge of Hera's private garden, where something very un-Olympian is afoot. There's a chill in the mountain air, the scent of fresh myrtle and divine rosewater, and goat? Not metaphorical goat, actual goat. A whole herd, in fact, has somehow broken into the sacred hedges of the Queen of the Gods. You know, the same Hera who once tied a storm to someone's ankles because they complimented the wrong temple drapery. And now, her prized lavender beds are munched, her peacocks traumatized, and the marble pathway sparkles faintly with hoof scuff and questionable droppings. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you are drifting off from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You watch as Hera herself steps out from her columned portico, arms crossed over her gold-stitched stola, lips pressed into the tight, regal line of someone who has witnessed one goat too many try to chew on a divine urn. The goats, to their credit, freeze mid-nibble, mid-moo, mid-casual desecration of immortal property. You expect lightning, thunder, maybe even a hydra, but Hera just sighs. The sound is ancient and silk smooth, like papyrus crumpling under moonlight. She waves one hand, and the garden gates slam shut behind her, trapping the herd inside. A breeze rises gently, not wrathful, just slightly judgy, and ruffles the peacock feathers scattered across the lawn. You trail behind her as she approaches the nearest goat. This one is chewing a sprig of laurel like it's a cigar. Its eyes are empty. Its soul is absent. Its manners are non-existent. Enough, Hera mutters. Not to the goat, but to Olympus itself. If mortals must be trained to sit upright, I suppose goats can be taught not to belch in my fountain. This, you quickly realize, is the moment where divine patience bends into divine mischief. She's not going to smite them. She's going to educate them, one hoof at a time. You lean on a pillar and watch as she conjures a scroll from thin air, inked in celestial gold. It rolls down to the ground, curls slightly in the warm breeze, and hums faintly. You peek over her shoulder. The title, Foundations of Olympian Decorum for Ungulates. Below it, Lesson 1, Seating Posture and Table Manners. And just like that, Goat School is officially in session. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In ancient Greek myth, Hera was often portrayed as the stern matriarch of Olympus, associated with marriage, propriety, and the enforcement of divine order. Her temples were known for their elaborate rituals, none of which, as far as we know, involved livestock, but etiquette and ritual discipline were central to her cult. Now, your quirky tidbit. Goats were not typically sacred in Hera's rites, but they were used as sacrificial animals in other deities' worship. Yet some rural myths claim her sacred groves were once guarded by golden-horned goats that could distinguish between clean and unclean pilgrims by the smell of their sandals. That part might not have made it into the Odyssey. Historians still argue whether this part of Hera's mythology, her more domestic, disciplinary side, was emphasized to balance out the wild chaos of other Olympians like Dionysus and Ares. Some scholars believe these orderly Hera myths were invented to encourage moral behavior in mortal women, while others suspect it was just comic relief for temple scribes stuck copying scrolls in the heat. Back in the garden, you see Hera lift a glimmering eyebrow as a particularly portly goat topples sideways into her chrysanthemum bed. Lesson 0. She mutters, "Learn not to faint during roll call." You chuckle quietly to yourself and follow her deeper into the garden, into a myth of manners that no bard ever dared sing. You're now ankle-deep in trampled greenery, navigating the wreckage of a once immaculate celestial garden, as Hera, Queen of Olympus, begins what no god before her ever dared. A behavioral reformation of goats. She surveys the herd like a general inspecting troops. Only, these troops have chewed through laurels hanging from their horns and the vague, disinterested expressions of animals who've never known shame. One of them coughs out a fully intact fig leaf. Another is somehow upside down. Hera does not blink. Instead, she claps once, just once, and the air crackles. You feel it in your molars. Instantly, the goats freeze. Their rectangular pupils dilate. Even the one who had just discovered the joy of standing on a peacock's back slides off with a guilty thud. From behind a marble pedestal, Hera pulls out a teaching wand, not just any wand. This one is made from ivory donated by a Cyclopean ambassador, reluctantly. You suspect, with a handle shaped like a scroll tied in a bow. She taps it once against her palm. Today's lesson, she declares, is respect. You're not sure whether she means for the goats or from them. Probably both. Her voice rings with that crisp Olympian clarity usually reserved for divine proclamations and very expensive legal scrolls. You shift slightly behind a shrub made of living gold, brushing away a leaf shaped like a tiny harp. The goats shuffle nervously. One of them lets out a polite-ish bleat, as though testing the mood. Hera gives it a single nod, and the goat faints in what might be either respect or performance anxiety. The others stay standing, possibly out of confusion more than courage. You have to admit, she's committed. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In classical mythology, Hera was frequently seen as the enforcer of divine standards, not just in marriage, but in ritual behavior and temple decorum. Her priestesses followed strict rules of appearance and conduct, and her festivals, such as the Hera, featured processions, hymns, and competitions designed to uphold ideals of dignity and order. But here's a quirky tidbit you didn't ask for but are definitely getting. In a few odd variants of local lore, particularly those circulated by island communities hoping to spice up oral storytelling traditions, Hera was said to have once tamed wild animals with her gaze alone. One strange version includes an episode in which she trains a rooster to announce formal dinners by pecking a bronze gong. Scholars usually gloss over that. And yes, historians still argue whether this softer, more reformative version of Hera was ever part of her original cult, or whether it was tacked on during the Hellenistic period to soften her image for younger audiences, or simply make her more palatable in myths that needed a strict mom figure. Either way, this Hera, the one before you now, has rolled out a shimmering scroll titled Basic Courtly Courtesy for Horned Attendees. The goats are made to line up, sort of. One drifts sideways. Hera telekinetically nudges it back with a breeze scented faintly of stern lecture and lavender. Lesson 1, she says crisply. Stand upright. Face forward. Do not eat the scroll. 3 goats immediately lower their jaws in synchronized guilt. You notice that she started calling them by names. You didn't know goats had names in Olympus, but apparently they do now. There's Philomena, the slightly cross-eyed one with a talent for knocking over urns. There's Beryl, who is, appropriately, shaped like one, and then there's Chad. Yes, Chad. He's the troublemaker. Chad is attempting to eat his own toga. He doesn't even wear one yet, but he found a fallen tablecloth and has made it fashion. Hera raises an eyebrow at him. You will sit, she intones. When spoken to, Chad chews slower. And yet, somehow, this is working. The goats are, miraculously, beginning to respond. You watch as they shuffle into something like a classroom row, tails twitching and ears alert. A giant hourglass levitates overhead. Each grain of sand is shaped like a pearled grape. Don't ask. You realize that you've been invited to stay, required to stay as Hera's unofficial assistant/witness. Apparently, when the gods start doing something this unhinged, they like having an audience. You pass her a chair, she refuses. No proper instruction was ever delivered while seated. She states, you try sitting anyway. She lets it slide. The first drill begins. Walking in a circle without trampling ceremonial herbs. Simple, right? Nope. Within 5 seconds, 3 goats have run into a statue. One is tangled in its own horns, and Chad is missing again. Hera closes her eyes. You brace for thunder, but instead, she whispers a word you can't quite hear, and vines shoot gently from the ground, nudging the goats like invisible dance partners, correcting their steps. Soon, the herd is trotting in slow, awkward circles, like toddlers in a waltz class. It's chaos, but it's polite chaos, and somehow, in a weird and oddly soothing way, you can't wait for lesson 2. You lean slightly on the arm of your marble bench, watching as Chad, the ringleader of disobedience, finally rejoins the group. now wearing what can only be described as a crown made of fennel. Where did he find fennel? That's a question for another pantheon. The training continues. Lesson 2. Hera intones is about table manners. Now, let's pause and appreciate the existential leap required to teach table manners to goats. You know, creatures who consider licking salt off rocks a fine dining experience. But Hera isn't bothered. She's faced titans. She's endured Zeus's interpretive dance of fidelity, teaching goats how to chew with their mouths closed. Light work. Before you can say ambrosia appetizer, the Queen of Olympus conjures an elegant picnic. It's all there. Tiny golden plates, silver goblets, embroidered napkins folded into olive branches, and yes, custom stools sized precisely for goats. This is fine dining, but uncomfortably low to the ground. The goats eye the spread like it's a trap, and you're pretty sure at least one of them has figured out how to flip a butter dish into a projectile weapon. Seat yourselves gracefully, Hera says with dangerous calm. Beryl belly flops onto a pillow. Philomena circles the stool like it's about to attack. Chad leaps clean over the table, lands in the grape platter, and bleats triumphantly. He has no shame, only chaotic ambition. Still, it counts as progress. You've now reached the stage where gods are adjusting goat posture with invisible strings of celestial energy. Philomena has a book balanced on her head to encourage poise. Chad is wearing a cravat. He's already trying to eat it. But the effort is there. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In ancient Greece, especially during the classical and Hellenistic periods, proper table etiquette wasn't just for humans. Sacrificial animals were often paraded or prepared with great ceremony, sometimes adorned with garlands and ribbons, symbolizing respect and sanctity. Some rituals even emphasize the animal's willingness to participate in sacrifice, a notion that, bizarrely, involved making them appear dignified and calm. And for the quirky tidbit, an obscure Thessalian fragment mentions a banquet where a goat was trained to nod approvingly at poetry recitations. Whether this was symbolic, coincidental, or just a very flattering retelling, no one knows. But it makes you wonder, were the animals judging the poets? Because that's a poetry slam you'd watch. Historians still argue whether these stories were ever meant to be literal, or if they served as metaphorical tales woven into early religious pageantry to create memorable spectacle. Some suggest these animal performances were dramatized ways to inspire reverence or just to entertain guests at elite festivals. Meanwhile, back at your current surreal petting zoo turned dinner party, Hera has begun phase 3, proper use of utensils. She doesn't mean forks and knives. Olympus isn't that uncivilized. No, she means the sacred olive wood skewers used for dipping cheeses and fruits, symbols of balance and intention. Every movement must be slow, deliberate, and show appreciation for the bounty of Olympus. Beryl has accidentally catapulted a fig across the garden. A passing nymph ducks. Chad is trying to joust with 2 skewers at once. You can't tell if he's innovating or rebelling. But Hera raises one elegant eyebrow, and he freezes mid-swing. You nearly applaud. Hera turns to you with what may be a flicker of, "Was that hope?" You can't tell. Her face is carved from the same marble the gods use for unflattering statues. Your turn, she says suddenly. You blink. My turn for what? To demonstrate. She waves a hand, and a miniature goat-sized skewer appears in your palm. Also, a slice of fermented honeyed fig appears on your plate. Great. Deliberate. She reminds you. Purposeful. You try. You genuinely do. You hold the skewer like it's a wand. You swirl. You pause. You chew slowly. One goat nods at you. Another bleats a cautious approval. Chad looks personally offended. But it's working. Slowly, the goats start mimicking your behavior, not perfectly, not even halfway well, but with a kind of messy, heartwarming effort that even Hera has to acknowledge. She claps once. The sky momentarily shimmers like it's trying not to sneeze. Very good, she says. Lesson 3 will be announced at dawn. Wait, what? You glance upward. You hadn't realized time was passing, but now the stars are beginning to twinkle with a kind of sleepy gold hue. The moon has sidled in like a sleepy uncle who doesn't want to make a scene. Somewhere in the distance, a lyre starts playing itself. Hera waves her hand, and a dome forms overhead, part magical force field, part silken tent designed to shelter the goats from the cool night air. They shuffle inside in a loose spiral, a little more dignified than before. Just a little. Chad, ever the contrarian, curls up outside the line, but when Hera lays a velvet napkin over him like a blanket, he doesn't fight it. You sink a little deeper into your bench, surprised by the calm that's crept in. Hera's madness has a rhythm to it, and somehow, training goats in etiquette feels right, or at least less weird than it did 2 hours ago. You close your eyes just for a moment. The air smells like thyme and warm bread. Somewhere in the garden, a goat is softly snoring, and Hera, she stands, arms folded, victorious over chaos, at least for tonight. You wake up to the sound of soft bleating, not panicked or demanding, just contemplative. If goats can do that sort of thing, you're still lounging on your absurdly plush marble bench, now covered in a celestial throw blanket woven from moonbeams, or possibly just very smug clouds. Above you, the silk dome tent from last night has dissolved, replaced by a sky blushing with sunrise. Chad is already up, standing at the edge of the garden and staring dramatically into the distance. Maybe he's plotting a revolution. Maybe he just sees a beetle. Lesson 3. Hera says, striding in like she's already been up for hours and personally filed complaints against 3 minor deities in a tree, is about procession. You blink. Procession, dignified arrival. She clarifies, a formal parade. A display of grace and intention. If you cannot arrive with elegance, you cannot participate in civilization. This is rich, considering you've seen Zeus arrive to parties by exploding through ceilings. But okay, the goats are summoned with the tone of a lyre plucked softly, like an ancient school bell. They gather slowly, blinking, stretching, yawning like little hooved retirees at a resort brunch buffet. Hera produces from thin air what she calls the path of respect, a long trail of rose petals, laurel leaves, and polished obsidian stones spiraling through the garden. The goal, walk it without breaking formation. Or, more realistically, walk it without flipping end over end into a shrubbery. Let's just say, the first round doesn't go well. Beryl trips on a laurel. Chad tries to eat the obsidian. Philomena just stands in place like she's been asked to recite the Iliad backwards. You start to wonder if this might be a metaphor for something like politics, or ancient philosophy, or middle school gym class. But Hera does not waver. She claps her hands. Time slows just slightly enough to give each goat the concentration span of a minor demigod. And, miraculously, they start to fall into rhythm. Left, right, left. No chewing on the path, no sudden detours. Just proud little hooves clipping across the trail like they've been rehearsing for weeks. Mainstream historical fact break. Processions were a big deal in ancient Greek life. Civic rituals, religious festivals, even funerals involved carefully choreographed parades. Citizens would walk in designated order. Priests, musicians, maidens with baskets, sometimes even sacrificial animals decked out in ribbons and flowers. It wasn't just for show, it was seen as a sacred reenactment of cosmic harmony. You marched well, or you dishonored the gods. Quirky fringe tidbit. In one poorly preserved Delian inscription, there is mention of a priest's goat who was trained to walk the sacred processional without soiling the stones. Apparently, that was such a feat of dignity that it was celebrated in an ode, possibly the only goat to receive ancient Greek poetry, not involving dinner plans. Historians still argue whether these animal appearances in processions were symbolic sacrifices, displays of wealth, or some attempt at spiritual participation. Some believe animals were stand-ins for humans unworthy of walking the path themselves. Others say it was just a fun way to show off a really well-groomed ox. You, meanwhile, are handed a flute. Encouragement. Hera explains. You raise an eyebrow. I don't play. She gestures. And suddenly you do. As you begin to play a slow, steady tune that tastes faintly of time and nostalgia, the goats grow even calmer. They start to lift their hooves with exaggerated precision. It's adorable and unsettling. Like watching a dance recital choreographed by Moss. One by one, they reach the end of the trail and pause, pose, bleat softly in modest victory. Even Chad, especially Chad. Hera nods approvingly. Much better. You lower the flute. So what happens now? She smiles not kindly, but not unkindly either. Now we polish. You assume she means metaphorically. She does not. Suddenly, each goat is draped in shimmering capes, some of silk, some of gold thread, one that appears to be entirely made of goose feathers arranged like a peacock fan. You stifle a snort. Chad looks like he's about to accept a Nobel Prize for licking things he shouldn't. This is Hera's vision. Not just etiquette, not just dignity, but spectacle. A lesson in self-respect taught through sequins and slow motion. She turns to you. Now, walk with them. Of course. So you step into line, matching the goat's measured pace. The flute levitates beside you, still playing itself, because why not? The wind carries flower petals through the air like applause from the universe. Somewhere far off, you hear a distant voice yell something about losing a sandal, but that's probably just Hermes. You finish the procession with the goat circling around Hera, who raises a staff not to judge, but to bless. Lesson 3 complete. You're not sure whether to bow or curtsy, so you do both. Chad imitates you flawlessly. Beryl just sneezes. Philomena, somehow, has produced a tiny scroll and tucked it beneath her cape. You don't ask questions anymore as the sun rises higher. Hera dismisses the goats for breakfast, a neatly arranged platter of ambrosia-laced oats, and what looks suspiciously like a golden apple carved into goat-sized wedges. Their reward for surviving another lesson in elegance. You sit back on the bench, stretching your legs. The marble is warm now, gently heated by the morning sun. Hera remains standing, already planning lesson 4, probably involving synchronized bleating or tea service. But for now, she looks satisfied. You exhale slowly. This may be the most exhausting etiquette class in the cosmos, but it's also strangely beautiful. The goats, they're just happy to eat. And you. Hey, you. You're starting to enjoy the weirdness. You're still sipping morning nectar. Yes, it somehow tastes like a blend of lavender tea and the exact nostalgia of summer vacation when Hera turns toward you with that same look she gives a goat right before it's told to stop chewing with its mouth open. Lesson 4, she says, brushing non-existent lint from her already immaculate robes. Posture. Because slouching is the first betrayal of civilization, you glance down. Your spine, apparently, has been committing crimes. The goats are gathered again. Chad is asleep with his head in a hydrangea bush. Beryl is balanced somehow on 2 legs, attempting interpretive dance or just a prolonged stretch. Philomena is meditating, or plotting. Up, Hera says, with a flick of her fingers. You, the goats, even a nearby lizard, find yourselves suddenly upright. There's an invisible thread tugging the top of your head, like you've just been enlisted in a celestial ballet corps. Your shoulders square, your chin rises, your dignity wobbles. Posture is philosophy in body form. She explains, striding between you and the goats like a catwalk coach possessed by divine ambition. It is the physical manifestation of knowing your place in the universe, and then pretending that place is slightly higher than it actually is. You feel personally attacked. Philomena smirks. The training begins. Step 1, standing still without swaying. You would think this is easy. You would be wrong. Step 2, turning in a graceful arc without knocking over anything sacred. Chad fails. Twice. A potted fig tree gives its life to his learning curve. Step 3, sitting like you're royalty but haven't yet decided if your guests are worthy of conversation. Philomena excels. Beryl sits like a furry beanbag. You try to emulate Philomena, but your knees make a sound like ancient scrolls being unrolled after 1,000 years in a damp cave. Mainstream historical fact break. The ancient Greeks were, in fact, obsessed with posture, especially as a symbol of virtue. Statues weren't just carved to look like gods, but to express an idealized form of human grace. A straight spine, an uplifted head, and a relaxed stance were all part of Etiquette, the excellence of both body and soul. Good posture meant good breeding, or at least good manners. Quirky fringe tidbit. Some ancient symposiums allegedly employed posture sticks, long, thin rods used to gently correct guests who dared recline at an unsanctioned angle during feasts. Imagine trying to sip your wine while being tapped on the shoulder like a cat caught climbing the curtains. Historians still argue whether these posture codes were uniformly enforced, or if they applied only to elite gatherings. Some sources suggest even rowdy athletic types were coached in noble stance, while others say most people were too busy working or wrestling goats to care. Back in Hera's garden, you're on to walking while balancing tiny amphorae on your head. The amphora is empty. The stakes are not. Beryl drops his immediately and attempts to eat the handle. Chad, miracle of miracles, keeps his balance through sheer stubborn neck tension. He looks absurdly proud. You want to pat him on the head, but you're busy keeping your own amphora from toppling into the ferns. Philomena is floating. You don't even question it anymore. Hera claps politely at the best efforts and raises one elegantly arched eyebrow at the rest. Then she summons a mirror not of glass, but of water suspended in midair. Each goat is encouraged to examine their posture. Some stare blankly, others seem vaguely inspired. You stare into it and see yourself as if carved from marble, draped in light and poise. You also see your shoulders inching up like they're trying to escape to Mount Olympus. You fix them. The water applauds softly. Hera nods. Lesson 4, complete. A bell chimes, one of those ancient ones that sounds like it's echoing across an abandoned temple. Even when it's right next to your head, the goats file out for their next treat. Fig cakes arranged in the shape of constellations. You collapse onto your now perfectly aligned spine. There's not a single pillow involved, yet you feel like you've just completed an entire spa circuit and passed a philosophy exam simultaneously. The sky above is clear, too clear. Actually, a suspicious lack of clouds, which means you turn to Hera. What's next? She simply gestures to the horizon. A golden pathway unfurls itself across the sky like a welcome mat for heroes, or possibly insurance salesmen with flair. But you're not flying yet. For now, you stretch gently, your vertebrae clicking back into position like sacred puzzle pieces. You watch as Chad practices sitting. His tail wags like a broomstick. That's just learned rhythm. Philomena is writing notes with a quill made of starlight. You lie back. Posture may be everything, but for a moment, rest is everything else. The sky path hums with faint celestial elevator music as you ascend not through effort, but through Hera's divine version of escalator logic. You simply float upward. Posture corrected, amphora balanced, and dignity optional. Tonight's lesson, table manners, goat etiquette, or as Hera dramatically names it, the diplomacy of dining. You arrive at a suspended banquet hall, crafted entirely from sky marble and reinforced with really confident clouds. It hovers like a chandelier above Greece, or at least above whatever part of Greece hasn't been smudged out by mythological edits. The air smells like thyme, ozone, and that mysterious scent library books have when they've been in the sun for too long. You're led to your seat by a goat wearing a sash. He bows. You curtsy because it feels right. Hera stands at the head of the table, flanked by 2 flaming peacocks and a pitcher of something bubbling suspiciously. Lesson 5. She intones, cutlery is a moral key. Oh, this compass. You didn't even know goats used forks. Turns out, they don't. They use hooflery custom-crafted golden prongs worn like stylish prosthetics. It's adorable. It's impractical. It's somehow deeply moving. The table is set for 16. You, Hera, Chad currently licking a grape like it contains secrets. Philomena already reciting the Iliad over her soup, Beryl chewing a napkin, and a collection of ceremonial goats who look like they were raised by librarians. The meal begins with olives, small, shiny, and apparently arranged in Fibonacci spirals on handmade plates. Observe. Hera says, demonstrating the correct angle to scoop an olive without tilting your head too far to the left. Too far, and you're considered rebellious. Too little, and you're clearly hiding something. You try, you fail, you retry. The olive escapes and lands in Chad's goblet. He shrugs and drinks it anyway. Mainstream historical fact. Break. Ancient Greek dining customs were a whole production. Guests reclined on couches, meals were often served in stages, and certain foods had strict ritual roles. For instance, bread could be used as a plate, a napkin, and even a spoon like the original multi-tool. And while spoons existed, fingers remained highly functional instruments at most Greek meals. Quirky fringe tidbit: there's actual evidence of ancient Greek goat banquets not hosted by goats, tragically, but involving goats as both meal and theme. Some rural cults even held feasts in honor of goat spirits or half-goat gods like Pan. Whether etiquette was enforced remains deeply questionable. Historians still argue whether certain utensils were widespread in rural areas or reserved for the elite. Some claim everyday folk ate with simple ceramic tools. Others believe even the poorest peasants maintained elaborate rules for communal drinking cups, like the kylix, which required a precise grip to avoid dribbling wine on your tunic. Back at the sky banquet, Hera shifts focus to the drinking portion of the evening. Out comes the crater, an enormous mixing bowl for wine and water. Hera insists that mixing is vital. Undiluted wine is for barbarians, minor gods, and men going through heartbreak. She says, you take mental notes. Each goat is given a personal kanthoros, a deep cup with handles that look like they belong in a gym. The ritual: raise with the left, sip with the right, avoid slurping. And for Zeus's sake, do not toast more than once per story told. Philomena raises her cup to the winds that carry secrets. She is immediately corrected. No toasts until dessert. Hera says without turning her head, you gently lower your own cup. Beryl is already asleep with his nose in his yogurt. Chad, meanwhile, has fashioned his napkin into a tie and is demanding seconds. Then comes the Katabos, a game wherein wine dregs are flicked across the table to hit a target. Points for accuracy, elegance, and mythological allusions shouted mid-splash. You try. Your dregs arc through the air and land directly in a ceremonial peacock's feathers. The bird glares. You apologize. The peacock flares its wings and squawks something that probably translates to amateur. Hera claps, amused. A fine attempt. Fewer consonants in the toast next time. Dessert appears. Honeyed figs sculpted into miniature temples. One even has tiny snails painted in sugar glaze. Clearly a nod to an earlier myth you missed entirely. You nibble, it's perfect. The sugar buzz competes with altitude-induced dizziness. Philomena begins arranging her utensils into a mosaic of the zodiac. Beryl eats a fork. Chad chews solemnly while giving a speech on the dignity of the almond. Somewhere nearby, a flute plays itself. And you've stopped thinking about elbows or eye contact. You just sit, float, breathe. The meal becomes rhythm. Chew, sip, smile, forget, repeat. A toast is finally allowed. To the goats who dine as gods. The table erupts in polite bleats and one ecstatic shout from Chad. You grin. And for once, your posture remains perfect without thinking. The goats are asleep now, arranged like fluffy commas in an amphitheater that defies basic geometry. They're tucked beneath napkin-sized quilts Hera crocheted herself, probably as part of some cosmic craft circle. Chad snores through his nose. Beryl mutters something about raisins. You try not to move in case one of them wakes and demands another olive. The feast has ended, but etiquette continues. Hera says sleep is the truest test of manners. Dreams, she explains, are where true refinement shows itself. No one respects a god who drools in his visions. You are handed a sleep veil, soft as goat wool and faintly lavender scented. Philomena shows you how to drape it so it doesn't crease your hairline or interrupt your psychic signal. You blink once, twice, and suddenly, the clouds shift into a dome-shaped observatory. Tonight, Hera announces, we chart the constellations of behavior. The stars above begin to twitch and shimmy, rearranging themselves not into bears or warriors, but into scenes of social catastrophe. There's one shaped like a guest who takes the last fig, another that clearly depicts someone interrupting their host with an opinion about soup. You try not to laugh, but you also can't look away. Mainstream historical fact break. The Greeks were obsessed with stars not just for navigation, but as a form of mythic storytelling. Constellations were not just named after heroes. They were those heroes: Orion, Andromeda, even Cassiopeia, all doomed to glitter eternally for their drama. The stars told cautionary tales, a kind of celestial etiquette manual with a high body count. Quirky fringe tidbit. There's a persistent fringe theory that ancient priestesses in remote Aegean islands used constellations to dictate social behavior, like don't harvest olives under Scorpio, or don't visit your mother-in-law during Capricorn. Totally unproven, hilariously specific. Historians still argue whether early astronomical knowledge was genuinely widespread or the exclusive realm of elite scholars and temple astrologers. Some evidence suggests that even shepherds and farmers knew how to read the stars, not for philosophy, but for planting, partying, or avoiding awkward visits. Back in the celestial dome, Hera gestures, and a cluster of stars reshapes itself into the constellation, the interrupting goat. It bleats mid-story and ruins the mood. You wince. Hera smiles. See, even the heavens have etiquette. You lie back on a nebula pillow while a chorus of harp-playing geese drift by. They pluck gently at golden strings, feathers glowing like night lights. Every note sounds like a sigh wrapped in velvet. Let us discuss the etiquette of listening. Hera says, floating upside down. Robes somehow still elegantly arranged. Silence is not the absence of speech, it's the gift of space. Chad opens one eye. Space is overrated. Philomena throws a breadstick at him. Even in dreams, she's precise. Hera waves her hand, and the dome zooms in on a new star cluster. This one swirls into an image of a guest dramatically gasping during a dramatic reveal. Then, asking a totally unrelated question, Chad squints at it. That's just me on Tuesdays. There's a lesson in this. Stories are sacred. In Greek culture, hospitality. Xenia was divine law, and a guest's behavior was a matter of honor. The host offers food, shelter, and protection. The guest offers gratitude, restraint, and, ideally, no emotional outbursts during the soup course. Story time. Hera says, you brace. She begins with a tale of Zeus disguising himself as a gerbil to test a mortal king's courtesy. The king, naturally, tried to sell the gerbil. The punishment, an eternity of minor inconveniences. Itchy robes, bland figs, and guests who never say thank you. Another constellation lights up a goat politely waiting its turn to speak, while flames flicker behind it. The caption reads, courage is quiet. You sigh. You hadn't expected this much depth from what started as a goat cotillion, but that's Hera's trick, isn't it? Lull you in with tiny forks and golden cups, then bombard your soul with ancient wisdom and sparkly goats. You look around. Chad is pretending to listen. Beryl is absolutely drooling. Philomena is nodding solemnly, one hoof tucked under her chin like a sleepy philosopher. You whisper a thank you to the stars. Hera hears. She nods without looking. The constellation overhead rearranges one last time. It becomes a mirror. Inside it, you see yourself not as you are, but as you might be if you remembered everything. To pause, to wait, to speak only when the words are ripe. Good. Hera says, now try not to dream about soup. The stars dissolve. The dreamscape peels away like parchment curling at the edges, and you find yourself back in the temple courtyard. Though it now resembles a sort of enchanted classroom crossed with a goat spa, the goats are awake. Sipping dew from crystal bowls and brushing their curls with tiny bronze combs, someone's humming a hymn to politeness. Probably Beryl. Hera claps once. The courtyard shifts again, like tiles rearranging themselves underfoot. Now it's a formal banquet scene, complete with reclining couches and a dozen ghostly guests frozen mid-toast. Philomena trots forward, fluffing her fur. You guessed today's lesson is etiquette in public spectacles. The theme, how to appear impressive without making everyone else feel small. Which, frankly, sounds harder than threading a needle with your eyes closed during an earthquake. But Hera insists this is essential divine etiquette. And honestly, you get it. This is Greek mythology, not a modern talent show. You can't just shout, look at me, unless you're prepared to turn into a cow or get turned into a tree or something worse. Public modesty matters. When gods are watching from every thundercloud, mainstream historical fact. Ancient Greeks valued sophrosyne, a term that kind of defies translation. But it's about balance, self-control, and measured conduct. Not humility exactly, more like knowing when enough is enough, especially in public. To boast was human. To boast elegantly, divine. Quirky fringe tidbit. Some surviving scraps of Athenian banquet manuals, yes, those existed, suggest guests were advised to moderate laughter, refrain from loud burping, and avoid telling stories that start with "you had to be there." Apparently that was just as socially lethal then as now. Historians still argue whether Greek banquet etiquette was truly standardized across regions or more theatrical in elite circles. Was there really a right way to recline while holding a fig? Or did different city-states have competing styles, like rival fashion houses but with olives? Anyway, back to the courtyard turned banquet hall. Each goat now plays a role. Chad is the boisterous orator, Beryl the silent brooder, and Philomena, you guessed it, is Hera's model guest. You're cast as the newcomer, the one who doesn't know which cup to use first, or whether to laugh at the bronze poet's puns. Hera insists this is intentional. Etiquette, she purrs, is what you do when you're slightly confused but want to make everyone else feel less so. You practice the polite nod, the sympathetic chuckle, the non-committal that means both I'm listening and I am fully unqualified to respond. It's harder than it sounds, especially when Chad starts a speech about the virtues of fig-based taxation. Hera gives you a look, the kind of look that says, "You're doing fine, but also don't ruin this or I'll smite you gently." You reach for a grape. It explodes with divine sweetness, like ambrosia if it had a crunchy seed and passive-aggressive commentary. You chew carefully, hoping no one is judging your chewing rhythm. Philomena gently adjusts your elbow angle. "Don't hover over the platter," she whispers. It signals food anxiety. You didn't even know food anxiety could be signaled by elbow placement. Your ancestors are probably howling with laughter somewhere in the Elysian fields. Suddenly, the ghostly guests animate. They begin to speak, their words slow and deliberate. "Tell us," one says, pointing at you with a chalice. "What makes you interesting?" Cue mild panic. But Hera intervenes, her voice silk and smoke. No one must prove anything here. The truly well-mannered guest finds curiosity in others, not attention for themselves. The ghost fades. You breathe again. Philomena offers you a congratulatory oatcake. It's very dry, but in a dignified way. Then the table resets, everything folding back into polished marble like a theater set between scenes. The goats clap, yes, actually clap. And Hera raises one eyebrow in approval. "Well done," she says. "You didn't declare yourself a demigod or knock over the wine. That's more than I can say for Dionysus." You grin. "Maybe you're starting to get the hang of this." A final tableau forms, a reflective pool inlaid with stardust and goat hoof prints. Hera beckons you to its edge. "Public grace," she says, "is not about performance. It's about presence." You stare at your reflection. It looks calmer, slightly better groomed. There's a flicker of understanding behind the eyes. Then a goat cannonballs into the pool, soaking everyone in divine sparkles. Chad, obviously. You dry off with a towel woven from clouds and old library receipts, because apparently even goddesses have an affection for whimsy. Chad, meanwhile, is shaking sparkles out of his ears with the kind of vigor usually reserved for wet Labradors and philosophers in crisis. The pool ripples once, then vanishes entirely as if to say, "Lesson over. Go think about what you've learned." But Hera's not done. Now she leads you plus the goats, of course, into a marble colonnade so vast it might double as an echo chamber for narcissistic heroes. The floor is polished obsidian. The air smells faintly of time and quiet disapproval. You're guessing it's time for the diplomacy portion of the course. Tonight, Hera says, you learn the hardest part of etiquette, how to pretend to be charmed when you are, in fact, being insulted. Mainstream historical fact. The Greeks prized verbal elegance, especially in political or social debates. Witty insults wrapped in flowery syntax were considered an art form. A properly delivered barb could ruin a reputation or win an argument without anyone throwing a punch. The ideal retort was calm, layered, and devastatingly polite. Quirky fringe tidbit. Some symposium attendees even brought insult scrolls to prepare jabs in advance, like ancient flashcards of shade. There's one scroll fragment from Thebes that simply reads, "Smile," even when they compare you to a tragic chorus goat. Historians still argue whether ancient etiquette emphasized restraint for the sake of virtue or simply as a survival mechanism in a world where your host might also be your executioner. Back in Hera's marble court, the goats have split into debating teams. Beryl, representing the school of restrained withering stares, opens with a long, judgy silence. Philomena, team captain, for grace, under pressure, nods and responds with a line so civilly devastating, you swear the temperature drops 10 degrees. You're told to mediate. You gulp. Chad opens with, your fur, it looks like it lost a wrestling match with a thistle bush. You flinch. Philomena blinks once, then replies, and yet I see you've taken inspiration from the same shrubbery. How rustic of you. Oof. Beryl simply sighs. Truly, Chad, your conversation is like undercooked lentils, chewy, and best avoided at gatherings. Hera is smiling, arms crossed. This is her favorite form of entertainment. Controlled intellectual carnage. You wade in carefully. Let's remember we're all here to grow. You say, trying not to sound like the second act of a corporate team-building seminar. Chad rolls his eyes. That's what Dionysus said before he gave a speech wearing nothing but ivy and bad intentions. You're starting to think Chad has a long personal history with being asked to tone it down. But you try again. Etiquette isn't just about politeness. It's about preserving dignity, yours and others. Even when the soup's cold and your seatmate thinks the Iliad is boring. That earns you a few solemn nods. Hera offers a slow clap. Well handled, she says, but the true test of manners is how you exit a conversation you regret entering. And just like that, the goats disappear. Not dramatically, just poof. You're alone in the marble court with Hera, whose eyes gleam like storm clouds trying not to gossip. She steps closer. You want to be graceful, don't you? She whispers. Then remember this. Charm is a shield, but silence is a dagger. She taps your temple with one long, perfect fingernail. You don't have to like them, she adds. Just don't let them know you don't. A door materializes behind her. You glance at it. She nods. You step through. Now you're in a symposium of shades, where shadowy figures reenact ancient conversations about fig prices and philosophical spoon designs. They argue fiercely, but with impeccable phrasing. A chorus of whispering goats watches from the rafters. You take notes. A shadow offers you a drink. It's warm, sweet, and tastes like fermented honey mixed with mild regret. You smile politely. Delicious, you say. The shadow nods. You lie well, it replies, and vanishes. You're getting the hang of this. Later, as the dreamscape melts into a quieter corridor of soft mosaics and goat-sized divans, you find a handwritten scroll waiting for you. It reads, Etiquette is the art of not saying the thing you're really thinking, and saying the thing they'll remember anyway. You tuck it into your robes and keep walking. Philomena trots up beside you, offering a single rose made of folded parchment. For your next debate, she says, or for sniffing theatrically when you want to end one. You take it. You're starting to suspect you're not just learning divine etiquette. You're becoming dangerously good at it. The corridor opens into a circular room made of onyx and pearl. Exactly the kind of interior design choice you'd expect from a goddess who once turned a rival into a heifer just to make a point. The ceiling is domed, etched with constellations and tiny scripted footnotes like Aries, surprisingly good listener, and Virgo will correct your grammar mid-curse. Tonight's lesson, the art of making an entrance. Yes, Hera insists that how you enter a room says everything about you. Apparently, if you walk in too fast, you're insecure. Too slow, you're arrogant. If you trip over the threshold, well, better be born a demigod, because you'll never recover from that in Mount Olympus social circles. You're handed a flowing chiton made of starlight and stern expectations. Chad's outfit, meanwhile, resembles something between a toga and a rejected curtain from Poseidon's guest house. He shrugs. It breathes. Mainstream historical fact. In ancient Greece, formal entrances were genuinely choreographed. At festivals, games, and even political speeches, the way one walked measured, poised. Arms held just so was meant to display honor, self-restraint, and gravitas. Being too animated could be interpreted as foolishness or madness. One wrong footfall, and someone might question your lineage. Quirky fringe tidbit. One Athenian noble reportedly had a slave walk into parties ahead of him ringing tiny bells, not to announce his presence but to announce his dignity. The bells were tuned to E-flat. No one knows why. Perhaps he just liked drama in a minor key. Historians still argue whether these public displays of poise were inherited from Minoan ritual culture or just the result of collective anxiety in societies with no Netflix to distract them. Hera gestures toward a massive gold-trimmed archway. Beyond it lies a ballroom lit entirely by floating orbs of light and the gentle flicker of philosophical judgment. You are to make your entrance. Everyone will be watching, including a few minor deities pretending to be impressed by each other's sandals. You glance at Chad. He's already mid-stride. No preparation, no drama, just vibes. He spins once like he's trying to catch a passing scent, then struts into the room like a goat on a catwalk. "Oh no," Hera mutters, barely containing a smirk. He's doing the Dionysian saunter. You try to follow her advice. Spine tall, steps deliberate, face serene. But halfway through, you notice Chad is actually drawing a small crowd of admirers. One dryad claps, a satyr faints. Someone from Team Zeus looks deeply offended. So you improvise. Half Hera, half Chad. You split the difference. Dignified hips, playful glance. Feet like you know the music, but you're not telling. You arrive at the center of the room precisely as a harp note shimmers overhead. Someone hands you a fig tart. Someone else whispers, "Excellent entrance." You exhale. Small victories. As the ballroom chatter resumes, Hera appears beside you with a glass of something that smells like lavender and looming deadlines. "Well done," she says. "Now conversation. Let's teach you how to flirt without promising anything and argue without being asked to leave." She leads you through a garden of glowing flora and socially exhausted gods. You meet Themis, goddess of justice, who tells you that correct posture is a moral obligation. You meet an unusually articulate goat named Marlowe, who recites Sappho but refuses to eat anything not shaped like a crescent moon. And you meet a demigod named Cleon, whose voice sounds like a drizzle of honey mixed with taxes. "You must be new," Cleon says. You nod, smile. "Your entrance had layers," he adds, "like an onion in a toga." You raise an eyebrow, and yours had the energy of someone hoping there's baklava in the next room. He laughs, "Charming and lethal," he murmurs. "I like that." Somewhere, Hera makes a quiet humph of approval. You're passed from one glittering conversational circle to the next. Gods of wind, minor muses, a chorus of amphorae that only speak in riddles. You practice what Hera taught. Don't linger too long. Don't compliment too easily. And if someone's boring, nod as if they've said something profound. You master the ancient art of smiling through mythological nonsense. But then the room hushes. A goat in a crown has entered. Beryl, Philomena follows. Head held high, a scroll tucked behind one ear like a diplomatic dagger. A duel of manners is about to unfold. Hera's final test. Not with weapons, not with curses, with compliments. Compliments so poised, so polite, that each one feels like a tiny embroidered insult wrapped in gold leaf. Beryl bows. Philomena curtsies. Chad burps softly behind you. You elbow him. Then the goat compliments begin. Beryl. Philomena purrs. Your beard has the texture of a storm cloud deciding whether to reign or retire. Philomena. He replies. Your poise rivals that of Athena's favorite statue, the one she hides when guests come over. Hera grins. Now it's your turn. Philomena looks at you. Would you care to offer a toast? She says, with a smile so refined it could slice marble. You lift your goblet. To the beauty of restraint, you say, and the grace of those who know when to stop talking. Silence. Then applause. Even the amphorae clap, despite having no hands. You've passed. And as Hera whispers, "Well played," into your ear, you realize you've made your entrance not just to the room, but to her favor. You're escorted to a second courtyard behind the ballroom, a place Hera only invites people when they've impressed her, or at least didn't spill anything on the divine upholstery. This courtyard hums, not with music or conversation, but with decorum, like even the fireflies know not to interrupt. The hedges are trimmed into labyrinthine swirls, as if someone once had a divine argument with geometry and lost on purpose. In the center, a reflecting pool so still, you can see your past mistakes ripple across it when you squint too hard. Tonight's subject, handling offense with a supreme elegance. Hera's voice is syrupy smooth as she says it, but you can already tell this isn't about letting things go. This is about delivering the kind of reply that leaves your enemy wide awake at 2 a.m. Replaying your words like a tragic chorus. Mainstream historical fact. In classical Greek society, verbal sparring was practically an Olympic sport. Orators were trained to twist insults into riddles and parables. While aristocrats valued the art of measured retaliation, a cleverly veiled insult delivered without raising one's voice was seen as the ultimate flex. Losing your temper. Utter disgrace. Hera invites you to sit on a low marble bench beneath a myrtle tree. Your challenge, she says, is to respond to offense without losing face. A gift box made of shade. Do we get to practice on each other? Chad asks brightly. No, she says. You'll be practicing on that. She gestures. From the shadows emerges a goat, a talking one. Again. This one wears a sash embroidered with the word patronizing. It coughs delicately. Ah, Hera's little project. I hope this lesson won't be as derivative as your last entrance. So loud. So improvised. You blink. Oh, it's that kind of evening. The goat continues, and your companion. What an interesting interpretation of personal grooming. Bold, almost daring. You turn to Chad, who is now holding a sprig of parsley and trying to braid it into his own hair. I'm calling this look pastoral confusion, he whispers. You sigh. Quirky fringe tidbit. There are scattered Greek texts, mostly marginalia, that suggest animals could occasionally speak during certain lunar events, and that goats in particular were viewed as custodians of judgment. Some believe they absorbed insults, so their owners wouldn't be socially cursed. These scrolls were quickly forgotten, partly because they were usually written in crayon-equivalent wax by someone named Doros the Unwell. Historians still argue whether the entire mythos around insult etiquette originated from Homeric poetry or from the harsh winters of symposium season, when there was little else to do but talk trash in verse. Back in the courtyard, the goat smirks. Well, nothing to say. You try to remember Hera's rule of 3. Never respond immediately. Always smile like you know something they don't. And begin with a question. You lean forward. I was wondering. You say softly, did your mother teach you how to speak like that? Or was it a gift from someone you lost a bet to? The goat pauses. It says, then nods. Elegant, deft, slightly cruel, acceptable. You've passed. But Hera isn't finished. She invites you to observe an ancient technique, the compliment trap. She demonstrates by complimenting the goat's posture so stiff, it must be due to a lineage of statues, and then praising its ability to always say the wrong thing at exactly the right moment. You and Chad take notes on a scroll that keeps changing color depending on how petty your words become. Chad writes, your silence is inspiring. Do it more. The scroll flashes lavender. You write, your presence is unforgettable, like a tax you didn't know you owed. The scroll turns silver. You're getting the hang of this. Suddenly, Philomena appears again. She's wearing a sash now too. Hers reads passive-aggressive. Oh, good. She sighs, still whispering wit into the air like unpaid philosophers. Chad leans in. Want me to handle this only if you do it without rhyme. You say. He turns to Philomena, bows deeply, and says, your elegance is surpassed only by your commitment to remaining emotionally unavailable. The goat gasps. Somewhere, a lyre breaks a string. You hold your breath. Philomena narrows her eyes and smiles. Charming, she says, like an echo of a compliment I almost enjoyed. Hera beams. You've now officially passed 2 levels of divine etiquette. She claps once, and a tray of fig leaf pastries appears. You bite into one. It tastes like secrets wrapped in honey. Now, Hera says, we move on to misdirection, the art of saying thank you while meaning prepare to cry later. You wonder if this is why all the other gods avoid her dinner parties. But deep down, you kind of love it. And as you practice saying bless your heart in ways that might start a thunderstorm, you realize you're not just surviving this absurd journey. You're thriving. Even the goat seems mildly impressed. For now, later that evening, as the moon rolls lazily over its divine course like it, too, has eaten 1 too many fig pastries, you're led to the next stage of your celestial curriculum. The proper art of arrival and departure, not just walking in and out. No. Hera insists that every entrance must ripple like a theatrical curtain. And every exit must leave a signature, preferably one that causes subtle envy. Tonight's training begins with a procession. You and Chad are given ceremonial cloaks, stitched with glimmering threads that shift color based on your current level of self-confidence. Yours pulses a reassuring blue. Chad's changes every few seconds like a disco ball with an identity crisis. Hera strolls beside you, wearing a veil that somehow sparkles and sulks at the same time. To command respect, she purrs. You must arrive as though the room was simply waiting for you to begin, which, frankly, you wish most rooms did. Mainstream historical fact. In ancient Greece, formal arrival was often symbolic. Dignitaries and messengers entered public spaces with choreographed steps. The way one walked into an agora or a temple could signal intent, emotion, or power. Some Athenian orators were even trained to delay their first words until the silence physically thickened. Posture like pride, pace like prophecy. Hera coaches, and make sure your sandals say, "I'm here, and I didn't trip." Chad, meanwhile, is practicing a flourish that involves flicking his cloak, raising an eyebrow, and mouthing the word "behold." It's a work in progress. Then come the exits. Hera demands that each guest in the courtyard leave one by one, using a technique called the withdrawing bloom. It's a slow spiral, 3 steps back, a pivot, and a look over the shoulder that whispers, "You'll miss me when I'm gone." And you won't know why. You try it. The goat claps. Philomena frowns. It's a bit much. That's the point. Hera whispers, grinning. Quirky or fringe tidbit? There is, believe it or not, a surviving fragment of a now-lost play where a minor god was mocked for leaving a party without curvature. Scholars believe this meant they didn't bow, gesture, or pause dramatically, just got up and left like they had laundry to do. A social disaster by divine standards. You and Chad try again. This time, you match Hera's rhythm perfectly. Cloaks rustle. Torches flicker. The courtyard exhales. You are now at minimum. Hera says, less embarrassing than Apollo. You beam. Chad does finger guns, which Hera ignores on purpose. But the evening isn't over. Oh no, you're led into what can only be described as the salon of subtle insinuation. Inside, the walls are covered with murals of former dinner guests. Hera has frozen mid-sentence. Each figure is etched in gold, their mouths open as if caught mid-comment. Those, Hera says, are the ones who couldn't master this next skill. Conversation layering. You and Chad exchange a glance that says, "Should we be worried? Speak plainly." Hera warns, and people will forget you. But speak in layers, and they'll be unpacking your comment for years. She gestures to a bench. Another goat joins. This one's sash reads, "Double speak." It says nothing at first, just stares. You clear your throat. I hope this room suits your complex tastes. The goat nods slowly. It's certainly an acquired architectural decision. Philomena smirks. Translation. This place is a maze for egos. You try again? One could almost think the ceiling painted itself. Translation. Chad mutters, whoever did it had too much divine ambition and not enough sleep. Historians still argue whether Hera's mythological reputation as the queen of layered offense was rooted in actual cultic rituals or literary embellishment by poets desperate to avoid lawsuits from Zeus's side of the family. Either way, the goddess had a talent for speaking in riddles that doubled as backhanded compliments and tripled as warnings. Chad tries his luck. This goat's silence is eloquent. He says, I feel heard, even when no one's speaking. The goat finally responds, and I feel complimented. Almost. You've passed the test. Again. Hera sighs contentedly and gestures toward the exit arch. We're nearly done, she says. Only one lesson remains. You and Chad follow her out. Your cloak's now steady in color. Yours a royal navy. Chad's finally holding firm at seafoam green, which he says feels intentional. As you walk past the hedges and murals and shimmering pathways, you glance over your shoulder, remembering to pivot, remembering the weight of silence, remembering what Hera said about entrances and exits. And for once, you don't feel like the awkward mortal stuck in a myth. You feel like the reason it was written. The next morning arrives with the reluctant enthusiasm of a snoozed alarm clock. Sunlight seeps into the marble courtyard in soft ribbons, and you awaken on a chaise that somehow smells like lavender, eucalyptus, and faint goat. Probably Philomena's doing. She's perched nearby, reading a scroll titled Curses and Compliments, a satirical anthology. Chad stretches, then immediately checks his cloak to see what color it's decided to be today. Mauve. He seems conflicted. Hera arrives with breakfast and a smile that is both gracious and dangerous. Today, she announces, we explore the most critical and treacherous domain of all, gift-giving etiquette. You groan quietly. Chad mutters something about the last time he gave someone a scented candle and accidentally reignited a feud between river spirits. You're not choosing a gift. Hera explains, you're sending a message disguised as generosity. She glides over to a display table filled with objects, carved olives, miniature lyres, embroidered kerchiefs, and what appears to be a perfectly preserved fish scale inside a crystal orb. Philomena looks up. That last one's from Poseidon. It's a long story. Mainstream historical fact. In ancient Greek society, gifts weren't just about sentiment, they were political tools. Offerings to the gods were calculated displays of reverence and allegiance, even among mortals. A badly chosen gift could insult, signal weakness, or bind one in unexpected obligations. Giving bread, that meant hospitality. Giving a dagger, that might just mean you're next. Hera waves a hand and the table begins to rotate slowly. Choose wisely, she says, and remember, a gift is always about the receiver, unless you're trying to insult them. Then it's about what they wish they were. Chad confidently picks up a polished pebble shaped like a foot. This says, I respect your journey. Philomena snorts. That says, you have bunions. You reach for the fish scale. Something about it feels ancient, poetic, vaguely salty. This one, Hera nods approvingly. That's a diplomatic gesture. Suggests you honor their power, but don't need to worship it. Chad switches to a hand-woven scarf. How about this? That one, Philomena chimes in, is neutral, says nothing. Perfect for people you're not sure exist. Quirky or fringe tidbit. In one lesser-known myth, Hermes once gifted Apollo a tortoise shell strung with sheep gut, which became the first lyre. Scholars love to debate whether this was a genuine act of friendship or a prank that got way out of hand. Apollo reportedly laughed, cried, and threatened Hermes all in the same afternoon. You and Chad are given one last task: design a gift for an opponent, someone who might challenge your position but must remain unoffended. You brainstorm. A mirror that only shows the recipient's best features. Too obvious. A loaf of bread with a note that says you deserve carbs. Too sarcastic. A quill made from a phoenix feather, so they think you want them to write, but also know they'll never be as legendary as the source. Hera claps. That last one, she says, is almost cruel. I love it. Philomena sighs. Remember when this was about goats? You return to the courtyard where the charm-tailed herd grazes. Unbothered by all this divine diplomacy, one of the goats bumps your leg gently and drops a flower at your feet. You freeze. Is this a gift? Hera steps closer. Ah, the rare and humbling act of being given something without agenda. Should I give it back? You ask. Chad whispers. No, man. Just say thank you before it grows a second head or something. You nod solemnly and bow to the goat. It bleats, as if pleased with your manners, and saunters off. Final exam time. Hera declares, tonight there will be a banquet, and you two are the hosts. You blink. Us. Philomena's eyes twinkle. Don't worry, you'll do fine. Probably. Historians still argue whether the gods truly hosted etiquette competitions disguised as feasts, or whether these stories were just allegories about the rise and fall of city-states vying for divine favor. Regardless, tales of immortal banquets often doubled as cautionary lessons. If you couldn't toast without offending someone, you'd wake up as a tree. Or worse, a minor footnote in someone else's epic. You and Chad spend the day preparing, selecting fruits, inspecting wine, fluffing pillows made from Pegasus mane, and practicing table introductions that don't end with sorry. What was your title again? The goats volunteer as security, each wearing a sash that says Host Protection Squad. You decide not to question it. As dusk falls, guests begin to arrive. Gods minor and major. Dryads in sequined gowns. Naiads dripping perfume and condensation. One titan who insists he's just here for the olives. You stand at the entrance, remembering everything. The pivot, the timing, the layered compliments, and, most importantly, the lesson about gift giving that says a gift, when done right, can either build peace or set the table on fire. Chad leans over and murmurs, "I brought extra scarves, just in case." The banquet opens not with a toast, but with a harp solo performed by a cyclops wearing monocle spectacles and a rather distressed-looking tunic. You suspect this is a new requirement under Hera's updated hospitality aesthetic guidelines. You and Chad, dressed in matching toga robes with embroidered goats along the hemline, greet each immortal guest with what you hope is a dignified bow and not just a controlled collapse. The goats, true to their job description, nod seriously from their assigned posts, each holding a tiny bronze bell in their teeth. It's unclear if that's meant to be ceremonial or alarming. Probably both. As you usher the last guest inside a demigod who smells faintly of mango chutney, you realize tonight is not merely about hosting. It's the final trial. Hera's been watching, judging, scribbling things into a notebook that may or may not be enchanted. You guide guests to low couches arranged in circular symmetry around the fountain. Pillows puff, goblets gleam. The scent of roasted figs and honeyed pine nuts fills the air. Every detail reflects the lessons you've absorbed. Gracious formality, subtle signaling, the performance of peace even under the sharp glare of divine egos. Chad whispers, "So when do we arm wrestle?" You nudge him in the ribs. "We don't, unless the Titan asks." A hush falls as Hera glides in, flanked by two birds wearing tiny capes. She lifts her goblet. Let the meal begin. Mainstream historical fact. In ancient Greek symposia, hosts didn't just feed their guests, they curated experiences. From seating order to conversational themes, everything conveyed status, trust, and alliances. A poorly placed cushion could insult a warrior, a slightly overpoured wine goblet, social doom. And then there was the crater, the wine-mixing vessel, controlled only by the host or the most dignified guest. Tonight, you and Chad control the crater. You mix the wine with just enough water to suggest hospitality, but not so much that anyone accuses you of frugality. That's the line you walk now. Generous, not wasteful. Gracious, not weak. Philomena, seated near the dessert tray, raises an eyebrow. "Well," she mutters, "at least no one's burst into flames yet." You pass trays of delicacies, grape leaves, stuffed with mythological herbs, cheese slices shaped like chariots, bread baked to resemble thunderbolts. One particularly moody muse eats only the olive pits and spends most of the evening humming ominously. Then comes the gift exchange. You hand your phoenix feather quill to the minor river god who once told you you looked mortal in a bad way. He accepts it with a forced smile and says, "How imaginative." Chad presents his neutral hand-woven scarf to a trio of grumpy centaurs. They blink, sniff it, and immediately begin arguing over who gets to keep it. Quirky or fringe tidbit. According to one obscure myth fragment, there was once a banquet hosted by Hestia where the seating chart accidentally placed Nemesis next to Dionysus. After 7 rounds of passive-aggressive toasts, the wine turned into vinegar and the roast chicken sang a lamentation. Scholars still debate whether this story was meant as political satire or just proof that gods should never sit too close at dinner. You remember Hera's teachings? Deflect tension with humor. Never outshine the most insecure guest. And if all else fails, offer more dessert. Chad, channeling the wisdom of a well-fed goat, starts juggling figs. The crowd chuckles. You breathe. It's working. Until the crater breaks, not explodes, not shatters dramatically, just cracks, silently, as if the weight of the evening's diplomacy simply became too much. Wine begins to puddle. A few gasps ripple. The harpist hits a sour note and mutters something unprintable in Cyclopean. You freeze. Then a goat rings its bell. And somehow, miraculously, everyone laughs. Even Hera. She raises her goblet, the contents now very clearly. Cranberry juice from Olympus's divine groves, and toasts to grace under pressure, to charm under fire, and to hosts who learn to host with honor. Even when the wine leaks, Chad does a dramatic bow. You just sit down before your legs betray you. Historians still argue whether these immortal banquets ever really occurred, or if they were invented as coded lessons about navigating the tangled politics of aristocratic households. Some believe these feasts were allegories teaching future leaders how to lead with decorum. Others claim they were thinly veiled critiques of real gods behaving badly while pretending otherwise. Either way, the stories endure. The night winds down gently. The harpist begins a lullaby that sounds suspiciously like a funeral march for wine jugs. The goats have fallen asleep in defensive formation. One of the centaurs has wrapped himself in Chad's scarf and is murmuring poetry about hoofprints in sand. Philomena sidles up beside you and hands you a final scroll. It reads simply, "Graduation certificate in divine decorum and caprine coordination." I added the alliteration myself. She whispers. Hera appears beside you once more. "You've done well," she says, softer now. "Few mortals survive my full curriculum with dignity intact. Do we go home now?" You ask. "Almost," she replies, her eyes twinkling. "But first, one last lesson." Chad groans. "Is it about dental hygiene?" "I knew it." "No," Hera smiles. "It's about departure. Knowing how to leave with grace is as important as knowing how to arrive." You nod, unsure what to say. Then, as if on cue, the goats awaken, gather in formation, and escort you both to the gates of Olympus. You don't argue. You don't turn back. You walk with the poise of someone who's juggled figs and made peace with a fish-scale orb. You descend from Olympus like someone gently being lowered from a chandelier. Awkward, strangely upright, and aware that everyone's watching even if they're pretending not to. The goats trot alongside you in perfect alignment, their tails freshly brushed and each wearing a tiny sash labeled Honorary Herald. Chad walks backwards for a few steps just to wave goodbye in exaggerated slow motion. It's unnecessary. It's also perfect. Hera's voice echoes faintly behind you. Take what you've learned, mortal, and for Zeus's sake, don't waste it on bad parties. Philomena, flanked by a swan wearing a monocle, gives a subtle thumbs up. You've officially graduated. The winding road back to the mortal realm seems a little less daunting now. You pass the pear tree grove where your training began. It smells of time, figs, and slight anxiety. The oracle's hut, once ominous, is now just mildly judgmental. Even the boulder that used to make snide remarks now mutters, "Well done." As you pass, you reach the crossroads where it all started, and waiting there, as promised, is the ox cart. But this time, instead of creaky wheels and an indecisive mule, it's been upgraded. The ox is a divine hybrid with glowing hooves. The cart's been retrofitted with padded seats, a built-in harp loop, and a snack basket filled with date pastries shaped like goats. Chad climbs aboard, already unwrapping a fig treat. "We should start a traveling etiquette school," he suggests. You shake your head. "Let's just get home first. Then maybe we write a book. 50 Shades of Grape Leaves." "No." "Goats and Goblets. A memoir." You sigh. "Maybe." You ride in silence for a while, lulled by the rhythm of the wheels and the quiet bleating of goats now nesting in the cargo section. The sky shifts to a soft, pinkish dusk. A breeze tugs at your toga. For once, it doesn't feel like it's trying to embarrass you. The world smells different now, not just because your sense of smell has been completely rewritten by divine cheese plates and fig-scented scrolls, but because everything seems slower, calmer. You've survived divine etiquette training. You've bowed to talking birds, mixed wine under pressure, and taught goats how to curtsy. You could probably handle anything now. A squirrel darts across the road. The ox slows just in time. Even squirrels seem less chaotic today. You close your eyes and lean back. You remember the moment Hera corrected your goblet grip using only her eyebrows. The night you argued with a constellation about salad forks. The time you and Chad accidentally invented a new seating arrangement that looked like a goat spiral and got a standing ovation from minor gods. Mainstream historical fact. In real ancient Greek culture, ritual and etiquette weren't just about pleasing gods or impressing guests. They were about harmony. Every gesture, every sequence of events was designed to reflect balance. The Greeks believed that disorder in social customs invited disorder in the cosmos. That's why symposiums had rules, prayers had choreography, and dinner was basically a performance, quirky or fringe tidbit. There's one peculiar legend in a forgotten scroll that claims Hera once attempted to reform mortal table manners by sending enchanted goats into village banquets to bleat disapprovingly when people slouched. Scholars still don't know if this was satire, propaganda, or just the world's first attempt at dinner theater. And historians still argue whether Hera's obsession with order was symbolic of female power in a patriarchal pantheon, or just a long-running divine inside joke at Zeus's expense. Either way, she got results. You, for example, now know 12 different ways to bow and exactly how to serve pomegranate seeds without spiritual offense. You reach home. Your cottage looks smaller now, but in a good way. Like it knows you've grown, so it doesn't have to. Chad unpacks the goats, who immediately reorganize your herb garden into spiral-shaped grazing zones. You light a small oil lamp and notice, taped to the door, a final message in Philomena's handwriting. Remember, even the gods need good hosts. Don't burn the figs. You smile. You probably will burn them anyway, but at least now, you'll know how to apologize properly with the right tone, posture, and a goat wearing a tiny apology ribbon. You step inside. The air is warm. The room is quiet. You set down your ceremonial napkin, now folded into a swan. You sit by the window, watching the stars. They blink at you, not like they did on Olympus, but kindly, like old friends. The goats nestle down. The wind is soft. And just before you drift off, Chad says, "So, tomorrow we teach the chickens how to curtsy." You nod, already half asleep. Maybe, but not tonight. Tonight, you sleep with your head full of harp music, fig pastries, and the faint, proud bleating of goats who once stood in front of gods and made them smile. And now, as the final stars settle into place above your little hillside home, everything grows wonderfully still. The goats, once so energetic and opinionated, are curled in tight woolly bundles beside the fire, their gentle snuffling blending with the soft rustle of curtains swaying in the breeze. A breeze, by the way, that smells faintly of time, old parchment, and the last crumbs of fig cake someone forgot to clean up. But somehow, it's perfect. Your toga has long since slipped into a sleepy heap around you, and your ceremonial sandals lie abandoned near the door, their laces in a gentle tangle, as if even they have relaxed. The oil lamp flickers gently, casting sleepy shadows on the ceiling, shadows that almost resemble tiny goats reenacting etiquette drills in pantomime. Chad is half dozing on a stool, arms crossed and head bobbing with the rhythm of some dream, where probably someone gets awarded a trophy for knowing which wine goblet to use with lentils. Outside, the world whispers. A few stars blink slowly behind a drifting cloud. The wind hushes the trees like a mother tucking in her children. And even the tiniest noise, the distant bleat, the soft creak of wood, feels like part of some divine lullaby meant just for you. There's no ceremony left to complete, no posture to perfect, no goat left unthanked. You've made it through the most politely bizarre journey in mythological history. And now, the only thing left to do is let it all fade, slowly, like a harp string's last note vanishing into velvet dusk. So let yourself go. Sink into your mattress, your chair, or your perfectly fluffed pillow like it's Mount Olympus itself. Let your breath soften. Let your thoughts unravel. Let the etiquette of sleep take over. No forks, no titles, no gods, just stillness and peace. Good night, honored guest. You've earned your rest.